my question that I had for you, which was, there's sort of like two distinct aspects to the realization, right? There's the feeling behind it, and then there's the logic and framework behind it. So like, I'm interested to hear for you, like, how did that awakening manifest? Was it more like the framework shifted first, then the feeling following, or the feeling first, and then the realization came from the feeling, or like, just how that kind of took place in relation to your realization or discovery?
Yeah. Yeah. So to piggyback on that, my awakening story, it was only 2 weeks after this event that I had posted something on some type of social media, some type of story about meditation, because I, dug straight into, meditation, Alan Watts, just trying to figure out what that experience that it just shifted my state of consciousness was, that kind of reached out and gave me some Aaron Apke, showed me the YouTube and stuff. As Connor and I were friends from high school. And so, I was starting to get into those more frameworks, more of these non-dual perspectives, more of this mystical Jesus perspectives that, it's kind of not shown in most of modern society. From the logical and feeling perspective, it is very complex because from the initial awakening, it can easily be a both. But it definitely felt for more of my first 3 years of really trying to embody it was more of a logical standpoint, which I think is usually flipped. Like for me, it was way more of the feeling and just already being in that state and trying to put the words behind it, that only when it kind of converged in a more embodied state, that something like a Kundalini awakening symptoms were happening in my experience. So to me, it was the culmination of those two together that really kind of awakened that Kundalini, which kind of just elevated it onto whole different spiritual dimensions, for lack of a better word.
So you're saying that it wasn't like necessarily one for the other. It was
Right.
It was really both at once for you.
Yeah, it definitely was. It definitely was a both, but how the flow of life kind of gets you. I was tiptoeing more in the feeling more often than I was tiptoeing the logic, whereas just trying to gain frameworks to explain the feeling is kind of the logical paradox of it all. Because it's a paradox. Anything that you're saying is kind of ending up in just paradox. And so from a logical standpoint, it's more about trying to figure out the framework to articulate the feeling. And so once you have more of an ability of understanding the logic behind that paradox, does the feeling and logic match up together?
So do you think you're able to narrow it down to like a moment where like the shift, like the biggest shift took place, or would you say it was more kind of just like a gradual thing? You can't really put your finger on like a moment or an action or something specific.
For logic or for feeling?
I guess both, whichever one was more significant.
Obviously, the initial awakening was going to be the only real point that I can really say for certain felt like an event. Obviously, once you go deeper into the path, all these events kind of just melt together. Like you'll realize you always were in that state of childlike wonder. But obviously throughout there are significant points in which your pattern recognition kind of shows up in a culmination, like you're solving the equation finally, where you can see the whole equation be put together, and now you can see what the result actually is, which is where you're in embodiment. So obviously there was a lot of points in which like stepping stones to get closer into those state of beings, into that true embodied state. But I couldn't really pinpoint any specific things that really were a giant influential things, but great stepping stones to get to the path.
I mean, we can keep diving deeper on this, or we can get into some more specifics. Like, I don't know what you're feeling. Like, I'm very interested to hear some stuff about like, chi body and stuff like that. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think to start off like by like still keeping it more broad on this topic of awakening, since you have had such a clear perspective and experience of it. I think, so many people are trying to, attain these kind of states of awakening and these insights and perspectives. And a big way to do that is meditation practice. And I'm curious for you to tell a little bit about your story with meditation, because from knowing you for so many years, whenever we were, first getting into all this, all those years ago, I remember that you just had a very disciplined meditation practice schedule. So I'd be curious for you to touch on that and talk about the relationship of that to your awakening experience.
Yeah, of course. So really what backtracked all of this discipline and meditative practice to me was that I was running from a very young age, competitively doing long distance cross country running. When you read any of these yogic texts, these tantric texts, these, traditional Chinese texts, they emphasize running a lot, not only for a karma standpoint, but for that discipline and mental discipline aspect. So to me, it was really through running that gained me this access of mental discipline, because you're just going on these crazy long miles. Like I was running 50 plus miles a week. I mean, for countless years, 6+ years. And that was really my introduction to meditation. Granted, I did not know it at the time. After my awakening, when I was deep diving into what it means to be conscious, finally having a direct experience, it was very complicated. And, the only thing I kind of knew from just hearing it every once in a while was meditation. I didn't know what it really was or anything about it. I didn't know ways to articulate it. But I had found myself being able to sit very still for long periods of time, letting the thoughts pass by without any attachment, which I would later now describe as meditation. So after my initial awakening, from someone who was depressed and trying to find anything to distract himself, I was now able to sit still in my own being for hours upon hours. I was ripping 6-hour meditations like it was nothing. This led me to, in my disciplined mindset that I had gained through running and working out and all that, I was able to make a consistent practice of just mindfulness meditation, just sitting there and watching my thoughts for like 10 minutes a day, an hour a day, whatever seemed fit. And it was, super useful to really train that body to stay in that state of being. I hear so many oftentimes of these people who have these great experiences, but it only lasts 2 weeks. Like they're in this bliss state, they're seeing this, non-dual perception, but it goes away. And to me, that, discipline of, formal practices is key. Even when you get fit and you get really strong, you get the physique you want. If you stop going to the gym, you lose it. And it's the same with meditation. So to me, it's really just that mental training that mindfulness meditation and those type of practices are super useful for. When it comes to deeper practices, when you're talking about like energy work, for example, like the Kriyas, Kundalini yogas, Qigong movements, it gets a little bit different because you're messing with a different type of understanding of your body than just the mental aspect that mindfulness meditation really taps upon. Granted, kind of all the same thing at the end of the day, but it is a super essential thing. So that just translated once I was, felt accomplished in the mindfulness meditation thing, as it was kind of my state of being rather than just a practice, that I really took upon more of these yogas, these qigongs, these energy works.
Amazing. Yeah. So you would say that it was mindfulness meditation
Right.
that was your main first practice. It was a simple practice that was just simply sitting with the thoughts and sensations and practicing non-reactivity
Right.
to them and just simply noting the sensations.
Right.
And yeah, so then I would be curious to hear about when your practices shift from this towards the more energy work practices, the Kriya, breath work, Tai Chi, Qigong,
Definitely.
practices, and how that transition was.
Yeah. to touch upon for the mindfulness, to me, it's super essential, even to this day, the importance to it, especially for this widespread issue that we're having with like mental disorders, is what we call it. So for mindfulness practice, for me, what really was causing what we would consider depression was this untrained mind, which made mindfulness practice super valuable in my experience coming from that depression state, which really felt like I was overcompensating with that mindfulness meditation, but for a good reason, in which I had an untrained mind for a long period of time that drove me into a state of insanity in which I thought life was useless. So I would always suggest mindfulness meditation. I think that is the foundation to all of these energy practices I'm about to discuss. What really came through as starting to do these yogas and these, qigong movements, these energy practices, was, like every other person was, we were starting with these hatha yogas, just working on the posture of the body. I was really into fitness through running and through working out. I was starting to see the pattern recognition of the body and seeing how important the spine was through these hatha yoga basic practices. But it really started to pick up after I really started to embody the natural way of being. I would really emphasize just the quantum biology of it all, that it wasn't until I was not only following my highest passion, but also getting into the sun and really just being way more natural with my diet, just connected to the nature, that these energy practices and Kundalini symptoms really started skyrocketing and, the momentum started. So after all those things happened, I started actually practicing Kriya more on a regular basis, which if you don't know about Kriya, it's a type of yoga practice that is really emphasizing on any type of energy work, internal subtle body energy work. A lot of it is used, Kriya is usually referenced to some type of Kundalini awakening type of energy work. And so my goal when I was going into that was to get to the state of beings that I felt like I was lacking. I was seeing other people in the spiritual community, people like Aaron Apke, who I looked up to, Sadhguru, and other of these great teachers, that they were at this embodied state that I didn't quite feel like I was at. And so these Kriyas really just jump-started the process that was already happening in my body, but really kind of accelerated it in a very controlled manner so that I was able to start sensing it and feeling it in my own state of being. Come the Kundalini awakening symptoms and just the learning of how the energy actually works in the body through that experience, then I was able to start seeing energy and feeling energy at such a deep level that it was up to my own state of being to start manipulating and flowing with the energy itself, rather than following specific techniques, but allowing the energy to flow and really get in depth to like deep parts of my body through the subtle body, physical posture, etc.
Yeah, so